Hi, Be Health Empowered family. Thank you so much for joining one more time on this episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. My name is Dr. Melissa Clarke. Thanks so much for joining. Thank you especially to our newcomers, our first timers today. I love that you've joined us. If you're joining us on Facebook, please remember to hit like. And if you're joining us on YouTube, please remember to hit subscribe. Now, we are here each and every week. We are here to bring you the health information that you need to make empowered decisions for yourself, your family, your neighborhood, your community. And we deal in facts and figures and science. We don't really deal with speculation and misinformation. As a matter of fact, we debunk it every week in a special segment, and we're going to be doing that again this week. So we really want you as our audience to participate. So make sure that as we go along, you're writing your questions in the chat, because we're going to get to them as we move through the show and bring in our guests. We're going to be getting to all your questions. So in order to help me every week, I have two really special co-producers who I love dearly. Miss Lila Mays coming to us from the West Coast, and Mr. Wayne Bruce coming to us from the East Coast. Thanks for joining me.
Hey.
Hello.
How's everybody?
Great. So we are doing great. How about you, Lila?
I'm good.
Fantastic.
Very happy to be here.
Very happy. My sweet sister Numsi.
So what's going on this week with the recap, y'all? Let's get into it.
We're ready to get into it, Dr. Bell. So let's do what we always do and get into these numbers. COVID cases, deaths, and then vaccinations. Do we have any good news this week?
Wow. Well, we are at 30.5 million cases, and we're about to take off on a surge, I believe, because 8 states are experiencing surges. And guess who's out front? Just take one guess. Just which state has been in the booth? Of course.
Florida.
And it's Florida for the win.
Yes. They're unfortunately leading states in COVID cases with variants, even as spring breakers are flocking to the beaches and then getting on airplanes and going back to wherever they came from, taking those variants with them. So I'm really concerned about what's going on down there.
Wow.
Yeah. And then with deaths, I guess you could call it good news. We're over 555,000 deaths, but we were experiencing 3,500 to 4,000 souls lost every day at the height of that surge in January. Now we're down to about 1,000 deaths a day, which is still horrifying, but it's still better than we were doing back in January. So that's good news. And then the vaccinated. 44 million people are fully vaccinated. That's not just first shots, that's fully vaccinated. Wow. It's roughly split. Yeah, it's about split evenly between Pfizer and Moderna. We got about 2 million in there from the J&J. Almost half the people over 65 are vaccinated now.
Wow, that's
pretty amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you got the vaccinated. Unfortunately, we have a number of deaths, and worse than that, we have Florida on fire.
We have people twerking in the streets of Miami, and
we have
Florida
people.
Yeah.
But all this is going on, and the CDC has revised its recommendations for schools. I don't know.
Yeah. And I don't know where that came from, why they felt that it was necessary to do that, because I think it just makes things more confusing. But this is the deal. So they've seen a lot of K through 12 schools be able to safely reopen and stay open as long as they strictly implemented prevention strategies. Now, the strictest part has to do with the masking. Everybody has to mask, and now we're being asked to double mask, right? 2 layers or 3 layers. Make sure it's tight fitting. And regarding that physical distancing thing, They're saying that it's okay to be 3 feet apart for students with all their desks facing in the right direction. But there's an important provision that people are missing with that. Community spread has to be low at its lowest amount for the 3 feet to be safely done, which it's a nuance. And that's what I'm saying, I think it's confusing. There's so many rules. I think it's going to be hard for schools to keep it straight, especially when, what captures the news headlines is, 3 feet is okay. It's really probably not okay in most places. And then even in those places where it is okay, where community spread is low, they still say there should be 6 feet between adults, so the teachers and the staff, between the adults and the students, between cohorts, so groups of students that move with each other, so those groups should have 6 feet between them, and then in the school lobbies and the auditoriums. So you still need to hand wash, you still need to sneeze and cough into your arm, they still need to keep the facilities safe and clean, they still need adequate ventilation, either open windows and the right kind of high level filtration in their ventilation system. And they still need to test, contact trace, and quarantine and isolate. So all those things are still the same.
Okay. So Dr. Mel, what about antibodies being passed to babies from their mothers? Is this a thing?
It's a thing. So women who've been vaccinated with the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, they haven't studied the J&J yet because it hasn't been given out enough yet. But they've seen that after birth, the babies of those women have antibodies to COVID-19. And it can also be passed through breast milk. So just so, my conspiracy theory people out there, I love y'all, but just be clear that that's normal. That's normally what happens. Moms pass antibodies to their babies in the last 3 months of pregnancy and pass it through breast milk as a normal thing with any kind of condition, whether it be tetanus antibodies, whooping cough antibodies, whatever. And for some of those other diseases, we've seen immunity last anywhere from 2 months to 12 months in the baby. So we don't know how long it's going to last for COVID, but however long it lasts, that's probably going to be when they start recommending at that age, children or infants be vaccinated for COVID-19.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. So Dr. Mel, recently a friend told me that after they got their first dose of the Pfizer vaccine, the janitor at the clinic came to them and said, you can't drink after this, right? It's like, what are you talking about? The nurse didn't tell me that. She's like, you can't drink. So is that true or not? Can people have alcohol before or after being vaccinated? Directly before and directly after?
You never know where your accurate medical advice will come from. It may come from the custodial staff. So it does turn out that alcohol does affect your immune response because it does affect the bacteria, the healthy bacteria that grow in our gut that help modulate and mediate our immune response, our microbiome. But, and we see this in binge drinkers and chronic daily drinkers, they get sicker more easily. They get pneumonia, they get flus all more easily. They're at high risk for COVID. Now, that being said, the effect of an occasional drink here and there hasn't really been shown to affect the response to vaccines. So the key is when you do get your COVID vaccine, be well hydrated going into it. And we know alcohol dehydrates you. So that might be one reason to kind of stay away the day before and the day of. And then if you do drink, it's always safest to do it in moderation in general. I haven't been drinking. To do it in moderation in general, and especially around the time of receiving the vaccine. Because the whole name of the game is we want to maximize our body's response to the vaccine. So we want to refrain from taking Motrin or steroids, and probably it wouldn't hurt to stay away from the alcohol.
So that means
just the day before or the day of.
That means you cannot hydrate with alcohol. That's a problem.
No, that's a bad idea. You always want to use water to hydrate.
People are going to be scared and they're trying to ward off their they blame it. I just need a shot of courage. They call it
Right.
liquid
Right.
courage. That's what they
Yeah. I say if you have to take your liquor courage, take it 4 hours after you've gotten you vaccinated.
do.
Sort of
Well,
like a celebratory thing, if you have to do
Okay.
it.
you that's not a whole lot of courage. It's over by then.
After, right, afterwards.
After, if you got to do it afterwards. So that brings us all back to the hospital action, because a lot of people are getting their vaccines in the hospital. But what about vaccines post surgery, or if you have to go in for surgery? What's going on there? Because I have a friend that's in the hospital, and he's concerned.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great question. And while we're talking about surgery, I want to make sure that everybody is remembering to get their normal prevention type checkup with your doctor, your colonoscopy, your mammogram, all that, because all that doesn't go away just because COVID is here. So when you have surgery, there's nothing about the surgery per se that's going to interfere with the vaccine response, but there are a couple things to keep in mind. The first is, if you might be on medications related to your procedure that might impact the effectiveness of the vaccine, that's important to note. And if you have some of the known side effects of the vaccine, like fever or achiness or chills, it's going to be kind of hard to know, is it due to the vaccine or is it due to the surgery? Like, are you getting a surgical infection? So the best thing to do is just to talk with your surgeon, the person who's doing the surgery, get their recommendation about whether they think it's a good idea to get vaccinated prior to the surgery, or wait until a certain period after the surgery, a week or so, before you get your vaccine.
Okay. All right.
Good
And
stuff.
there you have it. That.
Well, thank you all. I want to remind everybody, before we do our weekly debunk, to write your questions in the chat, because we're going to be getting to them. So now,
Here
what time is it?
It's debunk time.
The weekly debunk. Stopping misinformation in the tracks.
From Boy Bye this week.
Boy Bye says, everybody talking about the one-shot J&J vaccine, but aren't Johnson & Johnson's the one who put aluminum in baby powder? How can we trust them?
I don't know about that. Is that true, Dr. Mill?
So this was actually a concern of our panelist last week, who was a guest on our show, and she brought this issue up. And I really wasn't familiar with Johnson & Johnson putting aluminum in talcum powder, so I researched it. So I wanted to get back to you all this week with the answer. So that Johnson & Johnson did settle a lawsuit about asbestos, not aluminum, in their talcum powder. So their baby powder, shower to shower, as being related to causing ovarian cancer in women. Now, this is the deal. Asbestos is sometimes found in the same area where talc, which makes talcum powder, where talc is mined. So it contaminates the product. It's not like anybody is intentionally adding asbestos to the product. So the issue is that they did not adequately test for contamination. And this is actually a travesty right here. They did target overweight and African-American women in their ad campaigns, as their market share in the baby market started to take a nosedive as this information came out. So yeah, that part definitely concerning. But it's important to note, when we're talking about vaccines, they go through a very different approval process than cosmetics. Cosmetic products like baby powder are not required to undergo FDA approval. And it's only since this issue with asbestos in the talcum powder came to light that the FDA started testing, and now there's a warning on baby powder. The FDA, for vaccines and medications, as opposed to cosmetics, rigorously tests these vaccines. They go through a multi-step approval process. And this COVID vaccine is the most scrutinized vaccine and treatment probably ever in the history of the Western world. So we know that it was developed partly by government scientists led by an African-American woman who graduated from University of Maryland, Baltimore City, Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. We know that labs all over the world worked on it. It's been scrutinized by academics, by government scientists alike worldwide. So the bottom line, vaccines do not have additives. They have been vetted and scrutinized. Individual corporations are not what should be trusted, but the scientific process that this vaccine went through. COVID is killing people. Vaccines are not. Everyone needs to be vaccinated for the public good to minimize the spread of the disease. So that was what I mean. I was surprised by, that marketing issue, but overall, the vaccines are safe.
So Dr. Mel, I'm sorry, I have to correct you on something.
Okay.
Dr. Kizminkia Corbett did not go to University of Maryland, Baltimore City. She went to University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which is
My bad.
No, I mean, it's an easy city counting thing. And also you reminded me something, and I'm really upset at Johnson & Johnson now. Not because of the vaccine, because I think the vaccine is incredible, but they targeted heavy African-American women. So my mama and my grandmama used to put the baby powder all up.
Big Mama and them all did it.
Big Mama and them always put the baby powder up here.
And Caribbean women, Jamaican women in the Caribbean
Did they
use baby powder? Yeah.
All right, now
Definitely.
I just it was Big Mama and them before church.
No.
So I didn't mean to make light of it, but I come from a big family. You couldn't tell by how slim I am, but I mean, it actually happens. You couldn't tell. So that's the debunk, Dr. Bell. We're going to have to get on with the program. We're going to have to
thank you all. Thank you all. And, you talked about family, and tonight's show really is about family. It's about caregiving during and after COVID. So, we're all caring for loved ones during COVID. Those who just, there's an echo. So I'm sorry, I'm going to start again. So the show tonight is about caregiving. And, we've all had an experience probably in our lives with caregiving. We've, especially in the pandemic, may have cared for somebody who had COVID-19. And even before and during the pandemic, there's still been the need to care for those loved ones in our family who have physical disabilities, mental disabilities, cognitive disabilities like dementia or autism. And the pandemic itself has caused extra stressors on us and additional considerations that we have to keep our loved ones safe. And it's also been more difficult to navigate and get the services. People have been probably afraid to go to the hospital and to the doctors and take their loved ones for those needed services. And then caregiving has multi-layered demands, from caring for someone's physical needs to dealing with their emotional needs of isolation that your loved one might be going through because of their disease process or because they're getting older. And then to navigating the changing dynamics between you and the one who's dependent on you, especially if it's a parent or a spouse who's used to being independent and previously saw themselves as the one who was giving to you or protecting you. And now the tables are turned and you have to relearn how to relate to each other. So there's a whole lot going on with caregiving. So how do we keep from getting fried out, maybe ourselves coming down with a chronic disease, and even taking it out on our loved ones, the ones that we're supposed to be caring for? Tonight we have two really special guests who are joining us. Our first guest is Deborah J. Smith. She's had a lived experience as a caregiver with her mother. She's had a 30-year career as an executive legal professional, and now she's owner of SOW, a ministry through which she plans to help individuals and families manage the complexities of caregiving, and she's actually finishing a book on that topic. So welcome, Deborah. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to probably give Deborah a little time to get on camera, and we will go to our second guest, who is Kenya McGuire Johnson. She's an accomplished recording artist and songwriter, as well as a certified health and wellness coach who's the founder of a new virtual platform called Finding Your Voice After 40, where she delivers coaching services for diverse women that promote self-care, spiritual practice, and physical wellness. Thanks so much for joining, Kenya.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dr. Mel. Thank you very much. It's a very important topic, so thank you.
Absolutely. Now, I think, I'm going to start off with you. I mentioned several things in my opening about how multi-layered caregiving is and how complex it can be and all the issues that come up. How do you coach caregivers through some of the frustrations that they experience?
Yeah, this is a really challenging area. It's personal for me too, because I'm in that age of having aging parents, so I've experienced it kind of firsthand. But I think the biggest thing that I always encourage caregivers is remember to put the oxygen on yourself first. I think this is a thing we have to keep telling ourselves over and over in any caregiving, whether we're parents or dealing, with a loved one who's aging or ill. But anything that's going to give you the space to put that oxygen on yourself first is where I go. And that can be many ways to do that.
Yeah. And then there's also, I know many people experience this, especially with their parent. The fact that, that the dynamic of that relationship changes, and that can be really tough in terms of how do you now become, you as the child, now almost take on the role of the parent. And that can be very frustrating for the parent who feels like their independence and their autonomy is slipping away. So what do you tell people when they're encountering that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important. So a lot of times, even though we're taking on those adult roles, we're still the child, and we're, like you were just saying, we're still kind of navigating this. So I think it's really important to let people know that this is a normal process, that this combative, if you're getting some combative nature or some resistance, this is very normal. So that means you have to start going into more of an acceptance pattern, which I always tell people that means that there's a grieving process that's also happening. And so I'm really into mindset, and I'm really into people digging a little bit deeper into things. And I tell people, go get support for yourself. It might mean that you need to join a support group for caregivers. There are a lot of different support groups out there for caregivers, so that you can start, because every caregiving situation may have its own nuances. So it's important to get the kind of support given your caregiving situation. The other big thing that I push for is, therapy and these other spaces where you can have a safe space to process all this, so you can have enough bandwidth to allow your loved one to go through what they're going through without taking it personally or getting too emotionally stuck and stagnant.
Right. I think that's excellent advice. And I love what you said about the oxygen. When my book came out and I was on my book tours, so my book is called Excuse Me, Doctor, I've Got What? Taking Ownership of Your Health and Making Healthcare Work for You. And I would always talk about, how to do self-care. And I use that exact same analogy. And so what are maybe some other self-care tips that you might have for caregivers I always talk about the need to incorporate things in your life on a daily basis, if at all possible. So what are some other self-care tips that you might have?
Yeah, and this is a really unique time because we're doing all of this on top of a pandemic. So I do think that, one of the weird silver linings of this is that self-care is becoming more in the forefront. People are starting to think about that more. So some tips, I tell people to think of mind, body, soul. What are the different things that I can do to address my mind, my body, my soul? So mind types of things are those support groups for emotional support. Anxiety starts to creep in there. Depression can creep in there. So I think support groups and therapists, there are different websites now, BetterHelp, these different places who can help you find therapists if that's hard to do. That's something to think of for the mind. For the body, there's a lot of really simple, wonderful things that we can do for free. Simply getting out in nature, simply allowing yourself. And a lot of people say, well, I'm caregiving, I'm doing this, I don't have time. No, oxygen on self first. Even if it just means I'm stepping out, I'm setting the alarm, I'm stepping outside for 5 minutes to grab some fresh air. I'm going to go walk around the block. I'm going to make sure I hydrate. I'm going to fix myself a really healthy salad, because body is more than just movement. Body is what you're putting inside your body. So again, just thinking about these simple things we can do. Even if we're like wanting to go to Chick-fil-A because we're tired and we just want to grab something. I tell people, if you're going to get the Chick-fil-A sandwich, grab a kale salad on the side. Let's add some vegetables. Restriction can feel even more depleting when you're already emotionally exhausted. So let's add things before we take away things. And then for soul, this is a really special area for me. I push a lot of this. I don't want to say I push, but I really am an advocate for beginning to develop your spiritual identity and really starting to journal, starting to, beyond the church service, sitting down and just starting to discover yourself and your relationship with a higher source or some kind of higher energy. I think this is a really big foundation that we are going to need to dig into more and more. And I think a lot of people do practice a level of faith. I say, keep doing that. Keep making sure you're active in that. And if you're needing assistance with that, there are spiritual coaches, and obviously there's ministers and other people who can help you in that area.
Yeah. No, I love that mind, body, spirit. I talk about it in terms of, nutrition, sleep, hydration, movement, and managing the stressors in your life. And the managing the stressors part is where the therapy comes in, and also that spiritual plan that you really beautifully said. One of the things that I used to do with my mom when she lived with me was I would actually take her we would go on walks together in nature. So that way I was keeping an eye on her.
Yes.
At the same time as I was also getting my my exercise and my daily dose of nature in. And
that usually calms them down a bit too. You'll see. Being out in nature is really important.
Absolutely. And then I think that's the other thing is just, do you have any tips for budgeting time to get your own needs in? I know, like I said, I would combine the caregiving with trying to get my own need in, but do you have any other ideas or suggestions?
Oh, the big time management monster. This is something that, again, I think every person is a little bit different with how they manage their time. I think you have to be honest about your time. If you know you're a procrastinator, I think you need to be honest to that. And so don't overplan your day. But I do think also this is a time to ask for help from others too, so that you can schedule a little bit of time for yourself. And this is something that people can become very resistant toward and don't want to ask for help. And we get in this martyr kind of syndrome. But if you're doing that mind, body, soul work, you're starting to see the value of yourself. And even, there's a lot of different services out here that can do daycare for aging people, or for a myriad of different things. But I think looking into those resources where you can maybe once a week, you can put on your calendar, this is when I do this, or this is when I go for this appointment, or a spa, something, or I call my brother or my sister or my sibling to help out on Sundays, or one Sunday a month, or we rotate our Sundays if there's multiple people, family or friends. So I think you have to be very intentional, and you have to schedule it. You can't wait for the moment to just strike you. I think you have to, begin to keep your calendars and your planners, and again, be willing to ask for help when you just can't find that room, or you're just so exhausted. It's really important to raise the red flag and to say, surrender. I need some help so I can create some time for myself.
I think one of the things you really said was really key was, building your network of people, building your village, because caregiving in and of itself can be a very isolating experience. And they've done studies of resiliency, what makes people survive certain experiences better than others. And one of those key things is having a support system, people that you can call on. And it might not be your siblings, because one of the things that I've heard a lot of people complain about is, your siblings basically ghost you sometimes. And it turns out there's always one sibling who's the primary person. So it might be going to your friends. Maybe you have another friend who also is taking care of their mom. Maybe just like you do with kids with play dates. I mean, I don't want to make it as simplistic as
actually,
that. But,
Dr. Mel, I was just going to say this. I think that we
Yeah.
have to kind of recall our times, because a lot of us who are caregivers, we're in that sandwich age where we've had little ones before. Maybe they're a little bit older, but now we're taking care of aging parents. We have to think about when they're little, we think about those things. We call the sitters, we call the friends, we create, our community of moms and so forth. It's the same pattern really that you have to call upon as an adult, because just as when your kids are little, family may not be available or around, or you may not want certain family to be around with your children. It just depends. It's the same idea of finding that village, and being willing to, again, I think what I have found is that people feel that they can take care of it. They can just get it done. And so when we sit down and have, a family meetings, or sit down and really think about this for a minute, yes, figuring out who are some of the tribe. And, maybe there are some people that you think might say no. Wait for the no. Wait to hear the no. Don't assume the no. Don't assume the no. And then that way you can actually even plan more efficiently, because if it is a no, you know that, okay, I can take this as an option off. But you never know. The person may be, I can't do it always, but I might come in and help once a month or so.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And then you mentioned one local resource for caregivers in terms of, facilities that do sort of adult daycare, I think they call it. Any others that you have encountered in terms of being able to help to find resources for that caregiving journey?
Yeah. So this can be a very muddy space. And depending on where you're living, depending on your insurance, your financial situation, this can get kind of a little bit trickier. But there are more and more agencies and private agencies and nonprofit groups that are making themselves available to extend caregiving services. I would say in your local area, definitely jump online. I would put you can Google as simple, because it's going to vary city to city, state to state. But typically there are some private, caregiving agencies that's happening more and more, that offer at least some family planning and then kind of figuring out where the caregiving needs to happen. The other thing is to reach out though to your, primary docs, and who also have a lot of times information on the social workers and the caseworkers that maybe are allotted to your insurance or so forth, so that they can kind of come in. Social services has a lot of different areas other than what we may traditionally understand them to have. And they also often have listings of local private agencies that are open to being able to consult and see what kind of support services are around. So again, this is something that can be, overwhelming, but I think when you sit down and you begin to contact these different entities, whether it be your primary doc, whether it be your insurance company, whether it be going on Google and searching, a lot of times those agencies have wonderful plans for you, so they'll take it from there. I know that happened in my family. My father had he had advanced dementia / Alzheimer's, and when it was beginning, we had to sit down. It was a very difficult, because he was still with it enough to see that, wait a minute, I don't know if I need this, but we're like, no, we see this coming down the line, we're gonna need it. And it was really difficult to talk amongst just my sister, my mom, and him. So by calling an agency and finding an agency and having that person come in, they were almost like a mediator too. And they were able to really help us all understand kind of the different stages of care that they can provide. And there's a lot of different agencies like that. So definitely you want to look into your local, your local services.
Yeah. There's also that's excellent points. I've also run across a group of people called geriatric care managers, and they pretty much know the local landscape in terms of all the services that are available from your Department of Aging services, as well as if you're looking to for a place for your loved one to live, they can sort of give you the different price ranges of different places. And it's, well worth the investment. The other thing I found
Absolutely.
too is also from personal experience in my family with Alzheimer's, that if your loved one is getting forgetful, right? And you think that there might be a possibility that this might be a diagnosis and it has not been made yet. If you have any possibility of getting long-term care insurance, that's the time to get it before that diagnosis goes on on the chart.
Absolutely.
So before you
Yeah.
take them to get the evaluation, if you think you might you inclined to get long-term care insurance, is something that you all have talked about, get it before you go to the doctor, because once that diagnosis goes on, it's impossible to get long-term
Yeah.
care insurance. So
Yeah. And I think you're bringing up a good point of this planning piece. And those who are watching, you may not be in a situation where you're being a caregiver, or maybe you just know someone. I urge people, even if your loved ones, they're sprite and healthy and moving and still going to Walmart and still doing these things, you need to have these plans, because it's so much harder sitting down doing this work in the middle of all of this going on.
yes.
So, I encourage you not to wait until somebody gets to a point where they need caregiving. These are conversations that should happen while loved ones are still healthy, so that they can be a part of that discussion. And it just helps you even more for when the time comes. Or if you're in the early phases of that, yes, like you're saying, jump on that. And I know that, it's a lot. It's overwhelming. And this is when that whole mind, body, soul support, like, getting the therapist, getting the, people to start developing those relationships with a therapist, so that they can help you through this, because it is a lot. As I said, I know this professionally, but I also know this personally. It was one of the most challenging times ever, to watch that with my father. And we ultimately were able to get him, really wonderful support. Leading toward, he did, transition about 3 years ago, but leading up to the point, he was in a really, really wonderful, space. And it took a lot of tears. It took a lot of support, therapy, love. And, you can get through it. You really can.
Yeah, I empathize. I've walked your shoes. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's one of the toughest things to watch. I myself got therapy in order to deal with it. And I definitely recommend that to anyone who's going through your loved one changing in front of your eyes, and you're having a hard time kind of reconciling that with the person who you knew. One of the things I have to give credit to my one of my producers, my husband, who said to me, people, you're not the same person you were when you were 20. People change, and this is just the change that your loved one is going through, and change happens in life, and just take it one day at a time. And that was really, really helpful. And he's not even a therapist. So speaking of him, I'd like to bring my co-producers back on to see if we have any questions.
Great.
From the audience.
So we're going to have to go with this shot. And unfortunately, Deb is not in.
Oh.
And we're going to get her in. We're going to get her in. We're going to get her in as soon as we can. So I have to bring you in. This part of the... We're going to go to that shot right now.
Okay. We love you,
go
Deb.
to that shot right now. And Debbie is a Deborah, as we said, is a great friend of mine, and I've known her for over 30 years. So we're going to have her back on. I'm making a producer call. If we're not able to get her back in, I'm making a producer call. We're going to have
absolutely. We're going to make that happen.
We're going to make that happen. But yeah, thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Mel. I want to thank you, because the last thing you said was I helped you out, and and that was truly God speaking through me, because it was very tough watching. I'm very close to her mom, and it was very tough watching her change. But I had realized in dealing with my mom, both producers, we caretake. Lila has her aunt, and I had my dad. But at the time, I had just I had taken care of my mother for a while, and I had watched my mom's physical change, and then the
Right.
last part of her hospital stay, her mental status changed, but that was very, very quick. But I watched her physically change, so that was embedded in my spirit that we aren't the same people we were. She was a former basketball player
Oh,
and a
wow.
drummer in high
Oh,
school and
wow.
college. Yeah, she played drums, and
Mhm.
and just watching her change throughout her life, you know, that was something that I saw physically, and I realized that that's the same that goes if it's any mental status change in us. We're not the same
Right.
people we were, you know.
That is so true.
And Lila, you want to, in your nice hat and glasses.
I love that look.
People are
Thank
commenting
you.
on her hat.
I was
Are
about to
they?
say she's looking
Oh,
fly
hey,
tonight.
y'all.
I need to get
Thank you.
I'm next time. I didn't know I could be that fly. Next time.
I don't wait for permission, Kenya. I just go for it. Anywho, thank you for giving me a second. We do have some questions and I want to get to them, but you ladies both have said such amazing, amazing things and given us some great some meat to chew on. For all of us on camera right now, we are all caregivers or have been. So this is a subject that's very close to my heart. My sister's in the audience and she said, yes, along with my sibling, I am a caregiver. You said so many things about just the fatigue of it being one person who does more than someone else, and then just sort of having to navigate tag teaming all of that. I did want to say one of the, and by that, my sister and I tag teaming, we had to finally make a decision to get some help. And one of those resources for us in Los Angeles was an organization called 24-Hour Care, where we could just hire a caregiver by the hour. I think it was a 2-hour minimum. And we ended up finding one that we liked, who we would call when we all needed a respite.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
those resources do exist. In terms of giving yourself a break and some self-care. So this question is not about caregiving. This question is about the vaccine.
Okay.
Okay.
So this comes from Joyo. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so I am not going to. But
That's
she says it.
Disprul.
Oh, okay. In North Carolina, schools have opened. My 8-year-old cousin has contracted COVID-19. He lives with his mom. Oh,
Wow.
This is a statement, not a question. He lives with his mom and grandmom, who both have pre-existing conditions. The safety measures are not being followed close enough. True that.
You want to speak to that, Dr. Mill?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, school districts, the people that make them up, the parents who send their kids there all have very different beliefs about COVID. And so therefore it's hard. It's hard to enforce these things if not everybody is on the same page. And then changing the guidelines from the 6 feet to the 3 feet, I think just kind of muddies the picture and makes it even more difficult for everybody to get on board. So I hope, Joyo Disprul, that everything is fine with your 8-year-old niece, I think you said, or nephew. I hope everything is fine there with his recovery and in the household, and that the adults are able to stay healthy.
So we have a question coming from Alexis Proctor Kellum. Hi, Dr. Mel. I'm not sure if this question has been answered previously, but do we need to spread out COVID shots from the flu shot? If so, what does that timeline look like? Very interesting question, because we just had
great question. So yeah, speaking of caregiving, we just had this come up with Wayne's dad, who his provider gave him hepatitis B shots the day before he was supposed to get his COVID shot. And never asked him, hey, are you going to be getting a COVID shot anytime soon? Because anyway, long story short, it's recommended that you have 2 weeks separation between the COVID vaccine and any other vaccine that you're getting. And so if, for example, you've already gotten your first dose of a COVID shot and you're due for the second dose, and then somebody for some reason sneaks in a vaccine on you, you have another separate vaccine, you have a total of 42 days from the first Pfizer or Moderna shot to complete your series. So that was what we ended up doing with Wayne's dad. We were able to schedule his second COVID shot further out, so he didn't get it at the exact 28 days. He got it, I think, closer to the 42, right?
42 on the nose.
Yeah.
And he is at full efficacy today. On this
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. It's been 2 weeks since his second shot. Yeah.
weeks.
So I can go give him a hug.
Yes, you can. He's expecting
Nice.
that. And
Yeah.
tomorrow I'm at full efficacy. So I'm going to be able to hug my father for the first time in a year.
Yeah. And I was able to hug my mom for the first time in a year last Thursday. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Those spruels are on tonight's show, and this comes from Carl Sproul. In the course of providing care for an aging parent, how do siblings effectively minimize family conflict?
That is a great question.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to ask you to answer, but I'm going to just do this as a commercial for my siblings. They live out of town, but we work together, just as my mother, I think, would have wished that we worked together, because we're on all the documents, all the powers of attorney. So we make joint decisions. My sister was actually the one who was able to find, even though she doesn't live here, she was able to find a place for my mom. So I think you want to be able to play to the strengths of each of your siblings and be able to work as a team. Obviously, they're going to be, whoever's closest, physically closest, probably going to have most of the responsibilities, but everybody can chip in and do something, even if they don't live in your city, because there's a lot to be done.
Yeah.
Kenya?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. Especially with the part where you said play to each other's strengths, because I think that's one of the things that, gets frustrating, is like, well, I want you to do this because it's like, but if that's not an area, that if you will say you're going to handle all the paperwork with this or their bills or this, and it's like they don't even barely handle their own. No, let's shift this. And I know, even right now my sister and I have my mom she's 81, but she's able-bodied, she's with it, but she's 81. So one of the things also is just having as much frequent communication as you can, setting up regular times in which you can talk. There's usually, I think, bigger families, obviously, it becomes more challenging because you have more personalities that you're having to deal with. So again, I think, making sure and being compassionate and having grace for each other, because everybody, this is a grieving process. And I think we have to give more room for grief. This is one thing in our culture, for whatever reason, grief, we do this, we kind of shun grief, but grief is actually a very normal part of living. And if we don't allow ourselves to go through those stages, then we tend to deny, we tend to transfer, we tend to do all kinds of funky things that start to happen. So some people they don't handle this well. And I think you have to respect that for a minute and allow those who are able to engage and plan as much as possible, and not go into the judging and blaming, which I know that gets stirred up. But you have to understand that, again, this is a type of loss. This is a change. This is a shift. Everybody handles it a little bit differently. So I agree with everything Dr. Mel had said otherwise, but I do think we have to, and this is where the therapy comes in and the prayer, because it's hard to do that. It's not easy to give people the space.
Excellent. And Wayne, I know you have a question to ask, but I just wanted to piggyback on that really quickly in terms of giving yourself grace. As a caregiver, it is demanding on you physically, mentally, all of those things. And so conflict is just going to come up because of stress. I think we have to give ourselves grace and saying, this is crazy and different, and I'm tired. And, we get to acknowledge all of those things that come with being a caregiver.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have a statistic that I wanted to share, which is that 40% of caregivers report having 2 or more chronic diseases. And I think that is a consequence of all the things that we've said tonight in terms of not giving yourself grace, not taking the time self-care, not setting that alarm clock to budget your time for some time for yourself, not being able to, not effectively building a neighborhood, a network to help getting more and more self-isolated. So all excellent points.
That's a really, just really, really important. Really important. As you mentioned about getting those yearly annual exams and stuff. I don't know what the stats are, but caregivers, yes, absolutely. If it's not a chronic illness, it's definitely a decrease in their health status if they're not on top of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I want to say this because if she was here, she would probably jump in the middle of this because she has 2 brothers, Deborah, and she actually is in the chat, and we thank her for staying around. And she says, a caution for the primary person: be sure to you include your siblings, even if they aren't doing the work. Don't try to control it all because that can cause resentment. You're going to need them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she
Excellent
also
point. Thank
posted,
you, Deb.
caretakers take care. And I think and that's an excellent, and I hope I read it. I hope I read it
In her voice.
In her
voice.
I definitely didn't read it in her voice, but I hope it made her stand. And since we're talking about siblings, I mean, I'm so proud that our producers' siblings, we have siblings, and one of the siblings, not mine, the other producer's sibling, and her name is Angela Mays. Forgive me, Dr. Mel. My questions do not always go with the subject. I was wondering how to navigate when a friend doesn't want the vaccine or takes a wait and see approach because they don't, quote unquote, trust the government. I'm not sure how to move forward or even advise.
Well, excellent question, Angela. You can advise her to watch this show, number one. Number two, one of the things that research is finding that resonates with the wait and see crowd is what you get to do once you get vaccinated. How can the vaccine help us all return to some semblance of normal? And I think emphasizing that you'll be able to socialize together without a mask. You'll be able to travel and take trips together. You'll be able to meet up at a restaurant and be able to eat without your mask on, close to each other. I mean, there are all kinds of things that, getting vaccinated will help us move closer towards. So I would emphasize the positives of getting vaccines. Always let people know you have a choice. We have a choice. It's not mandatory, but by choosing not to, these are the things you're missing out on.
Wow, that's great.
So,
well,
I was just going to say, go ahead.
Yeah, man, we got people who have questions.
All right, I think we have time for one more question before we have to wrap up.
People are saying we started late, Dr. Mel, but I'm not going to say anything because we're not on radio right now.
Good point. We started 4 minutes late
right now, and I have one from a long-time listener, first-time commentator, as they would say, and she says, I have a friend. Her name is Janice Gary. We want to shout out Janice Gary. I have a friend who's afraid of getting the vaccine because she heard it could possibly affect her in having kids. Is that true? We've answered this before, but Dr. Mel, it's on you.
Hi, Janice. No, it's not true. That rumor comes from the fact that it's genetic material in the vaccine. And so people think that that's going to alter their genetic material and their ability to have babies. The truth of the matter is, throughout our lifetimes, every time a virus infects our body, it exposes us to its genetic material. So the fact that there's genetic material in the COVID vaccine is nothing that our body has not dealt with before. And our body knows exactly how to respond to it by making antibodies. It does not affect our fertility. And even that those studies that I quoted at the beginning of the show talked about women who gave birth during the COVID vaccine trials for Moderna and Pfizer, women who got pregnant during the trials. There are 15,000 women who've received the vaccine thus far. So, it doesn't affect our ability to reproduce. There's not even a mechanism by which it would do that.
Okay, and there you have it. I think that answers that once and for all. And I would also, if Lila wants to say it, but I'm going to say it, advise them to go back to Dr. Mel's page, her YouTube page, and look at past episodes and point it
For
out
sure.
to them, Janice. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm quite sure we've covered it a few times, but
A few times.
but that person, send that person, don't you go back. Send the person back.
No, she can go back. We can always use the
We know you've been on. Just go back and tell her, send the link for Dr. Mel.
That was a great question. It's a common question and happens all the time. But I'm afraid that we are out of time tonight. And I want to so thank, first of all, Debbie Johnson for her comments in the chat. I'm so sorry that we weren't on camera with you, but we'll make a way. And Kenya Johnson, thank you so much for being with us. You had some wonderful words of wisdom. Thanking my co-producers, as always, for their not just fielding the questions, but being such a vital part of our discussion tonight. And, we learned a lot. We talked about, building your community to help with caretaking. We talked about the importance of self-care. We talked about the importance of communication within your family. We talked about the importance of therapy, being able to access therapy to really go through those changes that your relationship is going to go through as you care for your loved one. And we talked about resources that you can tap into in the community to help on your caregiving journey. So I really thank all the audience for their wonderful questions. And, I'll be on the Russ Parr Morning Show tomorrow morning at 8:50 a.m. So if you're up, please listen out. And if I miss you there, I will see you next week, same time, same station, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you so much for joining. And remember, be wise, be well, and be health empowered.
See you guys.
Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night. Debbie Smith, have a good night.